and welcome to another installment of the Psychology of Better Call Saul, a series which attempts to understand the many psychological motivations of the characters in this television show. In this episode, I'm going to take a closer look at the character of Chuck McGill and the ways in which the shadow aspect of his personality affects his life and those around him. Chuck is a character who preaches high moral standards in his professional and social life, specifically toward Jimmy, but he often fails to see the ways in which his own morals are dark and sinister at times. The shadow is a term that was coined by the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung to describe the inferior portion of an individual's personality. Jung believed that everyone had a hidden part of themselves which contained most of the undesirable and incompatible aspects of who that person is, parts that they won't or can't admit to others or themselves. If this part of a person is left unchecked, it can wreak havoc on one's life and the people that are close to them. Normally, careful analysis by an objective third party is needed in order to understand our shadow so as to put a check on the ego consciousness. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This act is the essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge. In other words, recognizing one's shadow means careful and deliberate examination of one's actions and the resistance to taking all behaviors for face value. Although Chuck is often quick to criticize the flaws or mistakes of others, he often fails to see how his own shortcomings form a portion of his shadow. With all this information in mind, let's take a closer look at Chuck's disordered psyche. In Season 2, Episode 2, Chuck is shown playing piano by himself. Although Chuck plays beautiful music, he becomes very angry with himself when he makes a mistake, seemingly aiming for perfection. It almost seems as if the process of playing music is painful for him, due to the way he treats himself. Chuck has a view on life in which everything is very serious, in which being the best is the only thing that matters. He is constantly holding himself up to an impossibly high standard, and in turn expects the same out of those around him. Instead of reaching for the idea of being a whole person, someone who has developed all parts of their personality, Chuck reaches for the impossibility of perfection, causing him to look past his shadow side. In Season 2, Episode 5, Chuck has Jimmy over for dinner with he and Rebecca, a flashback scene to when they were still in a relationship. Jimmy is telling jokes that in Chuck's eyes are inappropriate and crude. Chuck has a hard time listening to Jimmy's humor and is pressuring him to leave dinner early because he thinks Rebecca isn't interested. But Rebecca soon begins laughing at Jimmy's jokes, getting in on the act during dinner, and later reminisces about the jokes while in bed with Chuck that night. When Chuck attempts to make his own jokes, she is unsure if he is trying to be funny, displaying his inability to understand humor. Chuck is completely unaware that he actually has a very limited personality and that he is unable to relate to others through comic attempts. He fails to recognize how he may need to improve upon this part of himself, and instead resorts to stale and lifeless jokes. Eventually, Rebecca leaves their relationship, possibly as a consequence of Chuck being unable to recognize his personal inadequacies. In Season 2, Episode 10, we see a flashback scene in which Jimmy and Chuck are with their mother, who is very sick and close to death. When Jimmy leaves Chuck alone with her, she wakes up and says to Chuck,
"Jimmy."
No, Mom, it's me, Chuck.
Jimmy.
No, Mom, it's me.
Chuck is shocked and seems to have difficulty understanding why his mother would ask for Jimmy, as he has always tried so hard to be the perfect child. He believes he has done everything right in life, while Jimmy is the one who has made constant errors. When Jimmy returns to the room, Chuck fails to tell him that his mother woke up, or that she said anything about Jimmy before she died. This reveals another layer of Chuck's dark nature. He will most likely hide this information from Jimmy and everyone else in his life until the time that he dies. Because he does not view himself as capable of doing evil, he has no reason to further investigate his actions for hidden motivations. Unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. Furthermore, it is constantly in contact with other interests, so that it is continually subjected to modifications. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected. In Season 3, Episode 1, Chuck is at his house, and Ernie has come over to help and drop off groceries. Ernie accidentally allows the blackmail tape of Jimmy to play, which alarms Chuck. Chuck talks to Ernie in a serious matter, and insinuates that Ernie might jeopardize his career if he says anything about the tape. Ernie is a young man who is trying to make his way in the world of law, and seems to not bother anyone. He often is shown trying to help others through guidance of his inner voice. He makes a simple mistake here, and Chuck immediately reacts with threats to his livelihood. Although Chuck often preaches about being morally upright and abiding by the law, these same rules don't seem to apply when the situation may affect him negatively. When his ego is at risk, Chuck will cross those invisible lines which he demands that others uphold. We see a similar incident occur in Season 3, Episode 5, another flashback scene showing Jimmy and Chuck preparing Chuck's house for Rebecca to come for dinner. Chuck is trying to stage the house to make it seem as if he doesn't have the condition which makes him sensitive to electricity and light. Jimmy says to Chuck,
Chuck, you sure this is the right play? I mean, in my experience, the bigger the lie, the harder it can be to dig out.
Despite Jimmy's words, Chuck is adamant about lying in order to get what he wants, which is another shot at romance with Rebecca. Once again, lying is okay for Chuck, as long as it fits his subjective parameters. But his lies don't seem to help, and Rebecca has moved on to other romantic pursuits. Chuck may think that his condition is the issue, but in reality, the denial of his shadow is a larger contributor to his life troubles. In the same episode, Chuck is on the stand for the trial against Jimmy, and we get a full glimpse of just how dark his shadow has become. When Jimmy tricks Chuck into believing that no electricity was in the room during the trial, essentially calling Chuck's mental health into question, Chuck becomes enraged. As an unfavorable part of his personality has been revealed in front of many people, he feels the need to defend himself, resulting in projections towards Jimmy. Chuck says,
He'll never change. He'll never change. Ever since he was 9, always the same. Couldn't keep his hands out of the cash drawer. But not our Jimmy. Couldn't be precious Jimmy. Stealing them blind. And he gets to be a lawyer? What a sick joke.
Chuck is using Jimmy as a tool for his projection. Projection is a defense mechanism which is used when we do not want to deal with uncomfortable feelings or emotions about ourselves, and so we blame others as a way to rid ourselves of these emotions and feelings. Projection often takes place in relation to one's shadow. Because one is unwilling or unable to see the unsavory parts of themselves, it is often easier to shift the blame to another. For Chuck, Jimmy is the closest and easiest target for his projections to fall upon, causing him to project onto Jimmy throughout the series. Chuck has been placed in a proverbial corner while on the stand, and so he releases a tirade of projections, like a rat backed into the corner of a maze, trying desperately to get out. At the end of the scene, everyone looks stunned, and as if they saw someone they did not know before. They still see Charles McGill, but they have also witnessed his shadow, which had remained dormant until now. While some traits peculiar to the shadow can be recognized without too much difficulty as one's own personal qualities, in this case, both insight and goodwill are unavailing because the cause of the emotion appears to lie, beyond all possibility of doubt, in the other person. In Season 3, Episode 9, Chuck meets Howard after being asked to leave HHM. Howard is concerned with Chuck's mental well-being following the court case, and is attempting to control the damage done not only to the firm, but to Chuck as well. Howard is often worried about the business reputation, but he has also shown consistently how he cares for Chuck and wants him to get better. Despite being offered a large sum of money and future career possibilities, Chuck is unable to look past his own ego and states that he is going to sue HHM. Even though HHM has been his longtime employer and Howard is practically a brother to him, Chuck feels the need to have his revenge in court. He seems to have become even more blinded to his personal faults at this time of his life and is having difficulty making positive decisions within his personal life. It seems that he has begun to look out only for himself and his ego, a true outward showing of a person's inferiority. In Season 3, Episode 10, Jimmy goes over to Chuck's house and attempts to make amends for what has occurred between them over the course of the show. As mentioned in my previous video about Jimmy's persona, Jimmy is attempting to be completely straightforward with Chuck during this scene. He is making himself vulnerable and letting his defenses down, as he doesn't want to lose their relationship. Despite these attempts, Chuck is still ego-driven and seems to not want to provide Jimmy a chance for redemption, no matter what. Chuck says to Jimmy,
Let me put your mind at ease, Jimmy. You don't have to make up with me. We don't have to understand each other. Things are fine the way they are. Hey. I don't want to hurt your feelings. But the truth is, you've never mattered all that much to me.
During the intro scene for this episode, we see a flashback scene to when Jimmy and Chuck were children, and Chuck was reading The Adventures of Mabel to Jimmy. Jimmy had mentioned this book in a previous episode, signifying its importance to their relationship, and the fondness of those memories. We see here that despite the current issues they have, Chuck and Jimmy have been close for a very long time. Chuck has been shown on numerous occasions bailing Jimmy out of situations and taking care of him when he was down, while Jimmy has done the same for Chuck. They are very different in personality, but they have always looked out for one another in times of need. But now, Chuck is determined to look away from the past and any emotional connections. He not only dismisses Jimmy, but he denies any feelings for him, leaving Jimmy out in the cold. Chuck is unable to see the cruel nature of his words and how over time he has taken actions that most people would deem morally reprehensible. But due to Chuck's denial of his shadow, all of these behaviors seem like fair play, as if there is no fault in his actions. He is blind to the evil that is within. We know that the wildest and most moving dramas are played not in the theater, but in the hearts of ordinary men and women who pass by without exciting attention, and who betray to the world nothing of the conflicts that rage within them, except possibly by a nervous breakdown. What is so difficult for the layman to grasp is the fact that in most cases, the patients themselves have no suspicion whatever of the internal war raging in their unconscious. If we remember that there are many people who understand nothing at all about themselves, we shall be less surprised at the realization that there are also people who are utterly unaware of their actual conflicts. This concludes this installment from the series on Better Call Saul. Please watch my other videos regarding other characters if you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for watching.